I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker is John Gibson. John Gibson is from CropQuest. CropQuest is a crop consulting company that provide agronomical services in about 8 states in the US. John is their precision ag specialist and A&M Aggie, as you can see from the quite Texan size behind you. John, you've been practicing precision ag for the last decade, and you and I have discussed and talked about tools and scouting and a lot of what we are going to talk today with our participants. So I'm really looking forward to hear your take on your experience personally, your team's experience, and how precision ag is part of CropQuest and what you guys been doing. So thanks for joining us. I know it's a very busy time of the year, so thank you. And it's dinner time, so
yes, ma'am.
We'll try not to make it too long. Perfect. We passed halfway mark in the course today. We're in session 4. We're talking about stress, how you can find it before it robs your yield, best practices, imagery, remote sensing, a lot of that. And you can always visit our website to have an overview of the course outline, what we have discussed and what we're going to talk about in the next coming session. So let's have a closer look at the agenda. What are we going to be talking about today? So we're going to be talking about crop stress detection, starting from what agronomists do, scouting the field, boots on the ground, and then talking about how remote sensing became a fundamental part of scouting, how it helped, what are the components that remote sensing brings to the table that scouting really thrives on, and it makes the complete full picture very, very clear. In the second part, we're going to talk about how an agronomist, when does an agronomist decide to pull the trigger and take an action? One thing is telling you you have a problem, and it takes all the experience and all the knowledge and a decision for an agronomist to make an action. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and I want to hear your thoughts on that a lot, John, especially the part that involves what to do with the information. In the third section, we're going to talk about, we're going to show some case studies, some examples from fields that you've looked at and other fields where crop stress had shown an ROI, and emphasizing how this piece of information, relating it back to the core of our course, which is how do we strengthen the relationship with the grower? So how does this piece of information gives confidence in the service that CropQuest is bringing, or in the service that any crop consulting company wants to bring forward? So let's start by gauging our participants' approach on scouting. Our audience is quite international, so they get to, I like those polls because we get to learn from them. What is their practice? What do they do? I'm going to launch this poll right now. It's going to be 3 questions. It would be great if you guys could answer them. The very first one is, how often are you in customers' field each season? Is it once a week, once a month, once a season, or I don't scout? What is the most important thing in crop stress management? Finding it early, knowing what it is, tracking it consistently. And the third question is, which scouting method do you use? Is it the visual walking? Do you use imagery? Or others? If you say others, we're very curious to tell us in details. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for voting. I'm going to end the poll, and let's look at the results together. Okay, so how often are you in your customer fields? A lot of our audience today do not scout. The second highest was once a month, tied with once a week. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the frequency. What is the most important in crop stress management? Finding it early. Definitely this is key. Early detection, trying to advocate being proactive. And which scouting method do you use the most? It's visual, walking, and scouting. Okay. And the second next is drone imagery. Perfect. So I think that would be exactly what we want to talk about. Perfect. So let's look a little bit at the scouting. The scouting started. Scouting gives farmers a lot of information, from what are the weeds in their field, what is the insect infestation, when to spray. All of that is to evaluate your crop progress, to evaluate or to determine in-season pest management practices or treatments and other management practices. So all of that, any decision that you make is affected, and it doesn't only affect your scouting information. It doesn't only affect this season, it actually spills over to the next season and the season after by building that knowledge of weak areas in your field or susceptible areas or soil areas. So that scouting is quite fundamental to understand the canvas, what you're working with. And the best practices of scouting have evolved also throughout the years to include taking pictures now with your phone or having apps, include GPS devices. Back in the days, they used to draw a symptom, or draw even an insect to go back to the book and be like, I saw something like that, what do you think it is? So the progress and the evolution of scouting have definitely moved forward. And the new step, this is, for example, here a picture of what a good scouting practice would be, which is going out and visiting the representative areas in your field, making sure you're trying to cover as much area, as much acreage that you can. And the latest addition to the evolution of scouting is the usage of imagery. The usage of drone data and satellite data to be fundamental part of the scouting practice itself, the event of scouting. So John, could you tell us a little bit about how CropQuest and the Precision Ag team that you're part of, how did your scouting best practices evolve to reach a point where now imagery is part of your program?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Manal and Anastasia. Just a quick recap for everybody that's joining. So CropQuest is an agronomic company. We've got about 85 agronomists that are checking fields weekly. And we cover about 1.7 million acres across our territory. So we do have to be very efficient in what we do to make sure that we get across all those acres, especially on a weekly basis. So satellite imagery has been a very vital piece of our crop service. We've been including it to our growers going on 5 or 6 years now. And it's our agronomists, even our most heaviest acred guys, they depend on it, and it's just like looking at a field and knowing where to scout, has become vital. And if our guys don't have it and their growers don't see it on a weekly basis, then they're asking, where's my imagery for the week? And it has gone from doing the spot checks or the zigzag pattern to looking for specific areas, not just the bad areas, but also looking at the good areas as well. But early detection is key. Specifically talking about mites or disease or any kind of pest, finding those things early. And most of the time when it shows up in imagery, specifically satellite, it's too late. So we want to catch as much as we can early, but whenever we start looking at things from a spatial standpoint of how is it growing, how is it changing, that tools like Fluoresat are huge assets to what we're trying to provide for our growers. You know, that's whenever the way we've approached imagery, mainly satellite imagery, has been a very simple one. We're looking at, we're sourcing Sentinel data just like most every other platform out there now. And we've always just looked at, you know, a straight NDVI image. And, you know, you can get into the weeds so fast with imagery. We've tried to take that really simple approach with our agronomists and with our growers, just to keep from trying to, you know, getting lost in one field.
Yeah.
And diving down into too many things. And you know, that's one piece with the crop stress detection that we're able to get with Florsat, having the ability for it to, you know, point out specific areas for us, looking at all the different layers, all the different indices. It basically does the weed whacking for us. It points out, you know, those areas of concentration, whether they're low stress areas or high vigor areas. You know, it points those areas out for us where we don't have to, we can just look at it and see, you know, how's that area grown? Is it changing? Is it new or whatever? But so this has been our next progression from where we started to where we want to go. So.
Yeah. And you touched on a very important point that even and the poll also highlighted, which is being proactive and finding a spot that will be problematic going forward in the season. And this is one of the main advantage of the imagery itself. I just want to go over a little bit, just mentions the three components that and you've mentioned all three of them in the way that you've described your experience with imagery. I just want to highlight those three components, those three characteristics of what remote sensing brings to the scouting event. The very first one is the early detection. So when a scouter goes out to the field and he walks and what he's looking at is his eyes, his RGB. He's trying to find anomalies. He's trying to find those plants that are a little bit yellow, or a plant that is wilted and it looks like it has an issue or something of that sort. One of the biggest advantage of the early detection using remote sensing and imagery is that we're not only looking in the RGB. We're also looking at the thermal layer. We're looking at the red edge layer. We're looking at multiple other layers where they are known to highlight subtle differences between a healthy crop and an unhealthy crop before it's even visible for the naked eye. So the early detection, that knowledge, that X-ray that we're looking at brings a lot of value and a lot of information that even if you go to the field and you scout, you might not see it. Another another characteristic of the imagery and what it brings to the scouting event is the fact that you have this bird's eye view. You are able to cover. You said you're in 8 states, 1.8 million acres, what you're trying to cover. So one of the best things you could do is rely on the imagery, because it gives you this bird's eye view, this overall image of all of your fields. And then when a problem area is detected, you're able to quantify it. You're able to come and say it's a 5-acre problem area, because we can just draw a circle around it and identify it as, this is my problem area. You have an exact size, a size you need to, because at the end of the day, any management practice that you're gonna do it based on that stress is you're gonna run the math. Do I want to replant? Do I want to go spray? Does it make sense? So I think quantifying that, and there is one example that's gonna come up today about how that number could help, you know, insurance case is something that I have an example on that. And
yeah, ROI is always a big thing with our growers spending the smallest amounts of money. So that's the, you know, being able to quantify it is a critical piece of this whole thing.
Absolutely. And quantify it financially, and quantify it also. I see a lot of applications where you want to make sure if what you did solved the problem or not. So you also, so that's where the extent of the problem area comes to play. Did it shrink over time? Did it expand over time? So that math, that ROI math, drives it home and drives the value of it very clearly. Of course, that was the point about tracking it over time, being able to say, and just understanding how your stress is moving spatially is also an indicator of the stress itself. Is it being drifted? Is it being carried by wind? So understanding the spatial spread of your stress is also very significant. It's significant in diagnosing it, and it's also significant in understanding if what I did worked, what I did not work, how's it growing over time. And speaking about diagnostic, so imagery is not diagnostic. I can't tell you, we can, from imagery, you can detect and see if it's stressed. You can see if it's chlorotic. You can see that A is doing better than B, but it's not at a point where I can say, oh, okay, A needs nitrogen and B needs zinc. And that logic really carries to how we approach even the medical situation. So when you're sick and you go to the doctors and you make an X-ray, the doctor look at the X-ray as well as your blood test and looks at other tests combined together. That's where the agronomist comes to play. The agronomist come look at that map, look at the weather, look at the yield, look at his knowledge of the field, combine that, take samples to the lab, come back with petule results, and decide, okay, it's that deficiency. This is the source of the stress. I'm gonna look, let's dig a little bit deeper into the infrared, and I'm gonna pull up one of the pivots that you are familiar with. This is one of your fields this growing season. And this is the case where we're looking at a pivot at a thermal layer. So we've imaged this pivot. On the left, you see this is the thermal layer with the temperature ranging from 52 to 103 Fahrenheit. And on the right is the NDVI. And this was shortly after planting. So you could see the NDVI is still less than 0.4 value. Now, looking at that thermal image and analyzing it, you are able to detect an area where the temperature and where the water is not being uniformly sprayed. And the reason behind it is we're suspecting a malfunctioning nozzle. This is actually one of your fields, John. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about this product?
Yeah, so one of the questions was, how are we acquiring the thermal imagery? So we're working with Travion aerial imagery, and it flows directly into the fluorescence tool where they're running the analysis on that. So with what Travion is collecting, we're getting thermal, we're getting RGB, and then we're getting the multispectral as well, so we can get the NDVI. And you know, there's several things going on here. You know, there's a huge planar skip there on the left-hand side, and then we do have the nozzle issues going on. So you know, there's multiple things there that are going, and you know, the easiest thing for us to fix in that image is definitely the nozzle package, or at least going out and fixing the clogged nozzles and stuff there. So these are all airplane flown. So Travion does all aerial.
Yes, yes.
So I was just gonna say, we actually don't do much with drones. We have some drones and stuff, but most of what we do from a remote sensing standpoint is all of our acres are covered with satellite data, and then we do have you know, a premium service with the aerial and what we're doing with fluorescence.
So what is key about this as well, and I want to highlight that, and this is something you and I discussed previously, is how in the NDVI sometimes the pressure or the symptoms of a dip or a problem does not show early on, but using that thermal layer is where you can get that piece of information and take action.
Yes, definitely. So when we first started looking at satellite imagery, you know, we could definitely see rings and stuff showing up on irrigated acres. And then, you know, but most of the time when we were seeing it and show up in the NDVI, we were also seeing it in the height of the crop, or, you know, there was some kind of visual stressor. But whenever we started looking at the thermal layer, we were able to catch that issue before we really started seeing any kind of issue. So, you know, it's like my rule of thumb is we can catch, you know, something you're going to see before with the naked eye about 2 weeks ahead of time with NDVI. And then, I mean, depending on weather factors and stuff with the thermal, you could be, you know, 2 weeks or more before you start seeing something with the NDVI. So you talk about being as proactive as possible. That thermal layer gives us a lot of information, especially on irrigated acres. This field in particular happens to be really sandy ground. So, you know, at this point in the year, we haven't had much rainfall, especially in this area. So I mean, we're deficit watering as it is in most places. So when we have a nozzle issue like that, it's really hard to get caught back up. So we've got to be, you know, get on it, you know, as soon as possible.
Yeah, and actually this is year 2 of you using this pivothermal alert, which is finding clogged nozzle. Last year it was during the season, so it was, you enabled that like what, June, July of the season. What's cool about it and I'm really excited is because this year you were able to run this analysis early on. So instead of waiting for the problem to happen, we kind of ran it right after planting. Right?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of our acres, we started flying, Travion started flying the first week of April, and you know, we hadn't quite turned on all of our pivots yet. And, you know, over the last month and a half, we've had a lot of pivots that have been fired up, and, you know, it's kind of funny to see, you'll see a pivot, you know, started up, and it'll go about a quarter of a circle, and then you'll just see a whole span where it just shuts off. So, you know, just the hiccups of getting started for the year, you know, we're able to catch those kinds of things. We've had not only nozzles not putting out water, but putting out too much water. And so we're able to see cool rings. And, you know, we're able to attribute that to nozzle packages that have been worn out. Their splash plates and stuff have gotten worn out or something. And so, you know, we want to be as efficient and aware of our water use as possible. And we definitely don't want to waste any. So those, whether it's lack of water or too much water in a specific spot, we want to be able to catch it as early as possible either way.
Exactly. Being ahead of the game, being early on in the season is the best place you, as an agronomist, you know, you want to be to service your grower. So that was an example of where where we use the thermal imagery to find something that we could not identify. Another example is when we look at the multispectral imagery. And I want to just briefly pull up this graph that we've talked prolongedly about on, I think, session 2. What I highlighted, that the magic that comes from imagery is the fact that plants reflect light differently if they're healthy or if they're not healthy. So creating those scores, it could be an NDVI or an NDRE or a CCCI, creating those scores to help us sort out which plants are doing good and which plants are not doing good. So just wanted to bring this up to highlight that the multispectral aspect of the imagery is also highly needed. And I actually borrowed this small blog I found on one of our partner companies, MicaSense blog. So this is an example. So MicaSense is the company that builds sensors that have red edge band. And this is an example that highlights how when you look at the NDVI, you can't actually see a stressed area. But if you have the capability to develop an advanced index like NDRE or CCCI, that's when you're able to identify some areas in the fields that show symptoms, subtle changes early on, and you're able to detect them much clearer in this index more than the NDVI index. And this is a picture of what was on the ground. So that would be challenging for someone who's driving in his truck, John, right by the pivot on the road and be like, I know there's a lot of supernatural agronomists that just know stuff with the weather. They know with, like, I've met a lot of agronomists that can really know what's going on, but not everybody is that special. And that would be challenging. That would require, like, it's really challenging to make sure that your scouting team are actually reaching that spot and detecting that early chlorosis.
Oh yeah. Well, I actually have kind of a funny example. Our former CEO had been an agronomist for 30-something years, and he had checked an oat field one morning and got a satellite image that evening, and brought it into my office and said, "What is this ring that I'm seeing?" He goes, "I was out there scouting there this morning and I didn't see this." And so we actually went out with the drone and looked at it to see if we could see, from an RGB standpoint, what it was. And basically what had happened was, whenever you look at, wheat or oats or anything like that, even doesn't matter what the crop is really, but from the ground level and you look across there, you can't really tell how thin stuff is. The example I always use is if you look at a balding man's head, from the side it looks pretty like a full set of hair, but if you look at it from the top, you can see his scalp. So the crop is the same way. And when we went out there and looked at it with the drone, you could see, there was some compaction issues that had reduced the amount of tillering and stuff that had occurred right there. So it was very interesting to, a 35-year vet of scouting fields and stuff, and even just he walked right by it and stuff and didn't notice, and we were able to quantify it and do all those things that we talked about. But the imagery is a key set of eyes for us that is a backup.
Exactly, it's a backup. It helps you clear the hypotheses. It's really awesome because it gives you an overview and a bird's eye view, and then you can use all the different layers to go deeper and deeper in it. And that's been quite what you described aligns with how fluorescents try to solve each of the problems that we have been talking about since the beginning of this course. And the way that it's key creating this dynamic system that needs and relates and depends on multiple sources of data, looking at the weather, at your machinery, at your soil. And then you're able to bring in the remote sensing part, and then you run an agronomical algorithm, an algorithm that accounts for the crop type and the weather and everything and all of the environment and all of that. So you come and you provide a piece of information to your agronomist, and enabling this agronomist to make a recommendation, and in some cases to calibrate, to correct. No, I did not see a problem. Yes, I saw a problem. This was the trend in that problem. So this dynamic system is what all of our products are based on, the capability to learn from multiple sources of data, the capability to provide a piece of information that the agronomist has a control and has the final say in the diagnosis or the recommendation or the action. I also have here another example that I'm pulling. This is also one of your fields that last year we imaged. As you can see, the stresses started growing from 27th of June to the 2nd of July. You could see the image that was captured on the 26th of July. When we ran the pivothermal on it, there was a lot of clogged nozzles. And then also that effect was all the way to the yield map. I think this is called circle 41, just to refresh your memory what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So what
I knew it as soon as I saw the pivot issues. I knew which one it was. So
yeah, so tell us a little bit, what did you do with that information? And I'm also interested to take the conversation to how will the information that you got, this is 2018, 2019, how did that help you become a better 2020 pivot situation to enable the grower? How did that information also enable you in the future?
yeah, so in this particular field and during that particular season, there were multiple things that were going on. Early season, we had quite a bit of moisture. The spot up in the top center was actually a drowned out spot. We had so much moisture early on. That spot held a lot of water, and we didn't get any crop growth there. As we got into mid to late July, we started to dry out. The rain shut off, and so we didn't see a whole lot of irrigation issues early, just because we had Mother Nature was providing for us.
Plenty.
And that covered up do what?
I said it was providing plenty that year.
Oh yeah. So whenever, the cool thing about this image, that the thermal image that you show, is, it looks like that field went to shit. Excuse my language, but that looks terrible. But in all reality, we were able to get those nozzles fixed, and we were able to fix a lot of that issues. There were some that we couldn't come back from, but the majority of them we were. So in preparation for this season, I think they've done some nozzle issues and stuff. But yeah, it definitely was helpful as we went through that season, and then as we were preparing, figuring out nozzle packages and stuff for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking at that water stressed area where we had water collection, it brought up the conversation of, do we need to do some land leveling or working on drainage and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's another big area. There's a question on the chat, how can it be used in non-irrigated areas? That's, even in our irrigated areas, we still have issues of ponding and lack of drainage. And then in our non-irrigated acres, looking at drainage tile and those kinds of things, water management, moving water off the field where it's not productive, is a good way to describe it. And so those areas of where you have really cool areas and stuff, you can really see where you have an oversaturation of water. And in our case, it usually follows behind the pivot very closely, just because of our water holding capacities and those kinds of things. But yeah, it's a useful tool for water management for sure.
And it was this pivot where you flew the drone and saw that dip? Yeah.
So this one, we actually didn't see the dip on this one, because we were able to catch it beforehand. So yeah, I was hoping that I would have a dip, but we had enough moisture early on that we didn't see any kind of issues. I've got a Mavic 2 zoom, so I was able to zoom down and actually see the drops on that pivot, and we had nozzles that were completely clogged. We had some that were just dripping out, drizzling out, or about half capacity, and you could see right to the line where all these were at, along the pivot, and where the alerts were at.
Yeah, I got here a picture of, I got a screenshot of that drone image when you were trying to find the dips, identify the areas. And to answer that question on non-irrigated, this is an example of an early disease detection where the satellite imagery was first used in 14th of July, and you could see that that the algorithm was able to see, okay, there's an area, it's a half an acre problem area, and it looks an anomaly. It's performing differently than the rest of your field. What the potato grower did in this case is that they commissioned a high resolution. This could be by plane, by drone, and then did the second flight on a high resolution flight on the 12th of August. And we were able to more precisely detect how that problem area spread, what was the pattern of the spread and the size of it, and how much it affected the yield. And definitely resolution here comes in play, like how accurate do you want to be between the resolution of the satellite or the resolution of the plane or the drone. And the same here applies to this case. This is also a potato pivot, one of your pivots also, John, from last year. And as you know, you look at the NDVI, okay, you're like, okay, there's this area here that is performing between the 2nd of July and the 7th of July. There's this area that's not relatively growing as much as everywhere else. And then you come and you overlay the thermal layer and you see what you see, something persistent between the 2nd of July and the 7th of July, which is those rings, that those areas that water is not being sprayed enough. This is also the case where you look at the first layer of data, the second layer of data, and you try to make a decision. And the ROI in this case are calculated based on, okay, what is the area that didn't get sprayed enough throughout the season, at least from those 2 days when the detection was there. How much bushel did I lose? How much capacity did I miss on? And that's what the grower wants to know. That's what the grower wants to hear about, how that tool could help them save and help them be more proactive.
Right.
I got here one more example talking about corn again, and how corn loves it when it's hot and humid, that type of weather. They just respond by growing taller and bigger and putting on more new leaves until the tassel comes out. And at that point, you know, that growth is really stable. And whenever there's those favorable conditions, there's those rapid bursts of growth. Whenever there's, you know, plentiful of moisture and sunny warm days. And at those spurs, the corn do become susceptible, and it becomes, especially to wind damage, which unfortunately is quite common in the corn belt. So with that wind damage, the reason why is that it starts to brittle, and it can often suffer something called like a green snap, which is the case where this image represents. So this is a case where we're looking at the satellite imagery all the way from June 27th. We're able to identify the area that was identified as green snap. You can see here it was the first time seen on the 27th. It's identified as new. Its size was about 4.39 acres. Moving forward, August 6th, you can see that this area has grown. Is it my kid or your kid? Yours, okay, good. And then throughout the time, you can track the growth of the problem area, and you can identify it, and you can use it, especially in case of the green snap. You know, a lot of growers and a lot of farmers buy insurance against that. So this was used in this case to identify and quantify the exact amount of the area that was affected, and then provide those information. Is that something common as well in your operations?
Yes, it is. And we've had, in our area, we have quite a bit of wind, you know, throughout the summer and the growing season. And, you know, we've had, if we've got 2 different varieties in the field, we might see one variety, you know, green snap worse than another one. And, you know, in some of those cases, or most of those cases, it'd be, you know, half one field and half the other, and as far as the varieties go. But we are starting to see more guys get variable rate planters, and so we are, you know, being able to quantify those, especially in those variable rate hybrid fields, is a very critical piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about this is that, okay, you're able to quantify the problem, you're able to find the stresses, but what's key and what, you know, we and I've personally been religious about is that last mile of delivering the information, easy delivery to the agronomist, to the grower, and how to spread that piece of information. I pulled up this example only because it has so much information. A lot of things happened in that farm. And this is an example for one of, at that point, just a prospect, and now they've joined our Fluorosat in 2020. So we looked at this field. It was me and the agronomist, and I was like, okay, let's learn about the crop stress. I was like, let's find the field, share with us the boundary, and then let's run crop stress retrospectively. Let me play a detective, plant detective, and come back and say, something's wrong here, something happened here. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So as you can see, there's two pivots. In one of them, the report came back identifying that this is an area that was really low performing, and he definitely confirmed and said, yes, indeed, this is an area that had a 10% yield loss come the end of the season. There was another area where, granted from the way and the shape of the problem area, his feedback was like, it has to be a planter error. And we haven't even, like, he went back to the scouting record and nothing of that was mentioned. And on this side over here, the green part, that's where there's an over-vegetation. There's a really healthy, lush, there's a gully there, and there's a lot of, it's a water dip, there's a lot of water in that area. And this side right here that was highlighted was a lot of problems as well. It's a well-known pH, high pH area that him and the grower have been, you know, strategically trying to decide what nutrients and what management practices to add to it. So I think the fact that that there is the delivery of an email that's easy to understand and communicate between you and your grower. So I want to hear your thoughts a little bit on what we call it, the virtual handshake. How do you, two folds of my question. One, how do you get the agronomists that are part of your team to, you know, be part of the digital ag and be part of tools like that? Because I hear that from a lot of the community saying, I have one person in my team that knows what to do. So how do you get everybody excited at CropQuest, you know, being part of this? And the second part is, how does products like this help you strengthen the relationship with the grower? And what do? You call them, you share with them the emails. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, you know, being able to communicate what you're seeing in the field with your grower, with the applicator, whoever's going to be, you know, whatever that, you know, line of communication has to be is critical. It does no good for you to see something out in the field and you not be able to communicate it to your grower, you know, in a quick and efficient manner, and then for them to, you know, hand that off to one of their hired men or the co-op or whoever is going to be handling it. So for us as a company, so we work with ProAgrica's suite of products, Cirrus and Summit, and we're taking all of our you know, infield scouting information, and then we have our own reporting system that we've developed that takes all the data that we put into those and makes them into digital reports that we can, you know, email, text, you know, share through Cirrus, all those things, to whatever avenue the grower wants to do. I mean, we even have guys, we still have guys that have printers in their trucks because either the farmer doesn't have a smartphone or he just is old school and wants a paper copy. So, you know, when looking at, you know, reports like this for, you know, on the imagery side, it's very critical for these guys to, you know, be able to quickly look at an image. And when I say these guys, whether it's the agronomist or the grower, you know, if you have an agronomist that sends a picture or an image to a farmer, and whatever you sent them doesn't really quickly explain what it is on the image, your agronomist is going to get a phone call and have a 30-minute conversation, and maybe about one field. And time is money, throughout the season. So, having these email reports that are, quantify the acres, show about, is this area, when was it first detected? How is it growing in size? As we go through the season, we start labeling these things. It just helps answer those questions as we communicate that with our grower. So not only are we communicating with them through our weekly scouting reports, but now they're getting these imagery reports that coincide with what we're seeing out in the field. So it's really pairing all these things together and making sure that one, the agronomist sees it and understands what's going on, which is we have a wide dynamic of agronomists in the company, and we've got everybody from a first-year agronomist, 21-year-old, first year out of college, to guys that are in their 60s that have been doing this, for 40 years. And we try to make it as simple as possible, but the coolest thing about our imagery reports that we're getting from Florestat is all you got to do is tap the circle. If you got your smartphone, tap the circle, and it's going to pull up the Florestat app. It's going to pull you right down to the field. So, those are very simplistic methods, and we've had lots of conversations about, okay, we don't want something confusing. We've got to make this as very straightforward as possible. We don't want to not have a conversation with our grower. We just want to have a productive conversation with our grower. Exactly. We don't want to have to educate them every time of, okay, what does red mean? What does green mean? What does yellow mean? We're not getting down to the key issue. And so that's a critical piece.
Yeah, and it's not about, I always have that sentence where I say, like, it's not about the data, it's about the information. There's one piece of information that all of this, analytics, all of imagery combined, whether all of this dynamic system resulted in. This piece of information is, I have a malfunction nozzle. I have an area that needs my attention. I have an area that is growing in size that needs my attention. So that level of intelligence of information is what enables, being efficient, using your time wisely, having the right conversations with the grower that rotates around.
Right.
You irrigated, you turned it on, or for example, you added you sprayed something and this was a problem area and it did not get down in size. It did not shrink enough. So let's see what we want to do about it.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a question in here about differentiating various issues like pH or crop stress problems. And I think that question brings up a very critical piece to our mentality as an agronomic consulting company, that, boots on the ground is still critical to all of this. The imagery is definitely a tool that helps us, but, deciphering between, high pH or low pH areas, those could be, crop stress is kind of the top level thing. And okay, what is causing that crop stress? Is it, pH issues? Is it nutrient issues? Is it nutrient issues because of pH? Is it, water? Is it disease? Whatever it might be. The first part is identifying it, and then, knowing where to look to start diving down into the different problems.
Yeah,
I
go back to the figure and show, like, where the agronomist is the core, the experience, the expertise, the putting all the pieces together. Just like how when you go do a blood test, you've got your red blood count, you've got your temperature, you've got multiple points of information, but it's the doctor, it's the knowledge, it's the person, the agronomist that can put it all together and differentiate. Imagery is not diagnostic. I can't tell you, it can't say from this way if it's a pH or if it's another problem. that's where the other sources of data would come in to provide that that knowledge and that resolution, that label of this is X problem or not. But thanks for the question. That's a very good question. And I always reiterate that the best we could do with imagery is guesstimate. Up until we were able to learn more, and up until we were able to collect signatures of diseases that we can learn and learn from, and then try to guesstimate. That's I think you touched on a lot of important things, especially the fact that the information is important, delivering it is important, the conversation that it creates are important. It's not something that is only this season. It's you're just building your history and your knowledge of your field to make you ready for the next growing season. And what I like about this crop stress is that it can also look retrospectively. So for all the people that are on the platform, they can bring in a field of that they know about and run the crop stress and be like, okay, is the imagery picking up the issues that I know? I knew at the end of the season that this was a problem. When did actually satellite pick it up? Or when did actually my drone pick it up? So I encourage everyone to do this exercise this week. And I see that, okay, we've answered that question. We've answered the question about, perfect. We're running out of time, but I just want to make sure that we've answered all of the questions. And if you guys have any more questions you want to ask us, please feel free to email us and send us all your questions, and we'll make sure we'll reply to you via email. So what did we talk about today? We talked about scouting the old ways, from boots on the ground to remote sensing, and what remote sensing brings to the table. When do you pull the trigger? When do you make the decision of you want to take an action? And the last one was, we talked about a few examples. John, thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing. This is your second year doing, relying on those imagery to help you make a decision. And always, using your judgment of what does this mean? What does that bring to the table? Thank you guys for joining us today. Please follow us on social media. Send us any questions if you need any follow-ups, and check out our resources. John, thanks again. Thank you so much for joining us today. A big thank you to your kid, Emily. You've been so helpful this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank goodness for Disney Plus.
I know. I'm guilty myself as well. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week, next Thursday, same time, same link. Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Manal.
Thank you.